and welcome back to the MILELE readings. We're on chapter 30. Yay, we are getting there. Only 10 more chapters after this. Let's recap 29. Our baby Moses, or Momo, is toddling and has several teeth. The bad news is Keiko has Eden 2 under sanctions, where he is allowing things to leave there, produce and stuff, but he is not allowing them to get anything. He's restricting everything delivered there. That is until he gets an audience with Hope. And Governor Peter, of course, has her under lockdown. She's not allowed to leave the compound unless she's with Agios. And Ruth, of course, is feeling even more protective towards her. But plans are underway for Hope and Boa to address the entire population of Eden 2. And interestingly enough, the no couples policy has been disbanded by order of Agios. And so we see more that Anna actually has feelings for Justin. Also, we see that Vohan's health is deteriorating. Do you know yet who he is? Now, Dr. Mizra also had more insight into the sovereign emperor through Hope's impressions of him, which has given her more hope herself. Let's see. And Lucas is well again. We're so happy. That scene with Lucas and Cree and Boa and Lucas's impression of Prince Adani. It's beautiful. Okay, so let's move right along to Sicily to see what's up with Nathan and Faith. 2 days after the attempted kidnapping, Nathan heard hurried footsteps coming up from the second level of the host home. Of course, you remember he and Faith and Mr. D rescued a child from being kidnapped. His heart leapt in anticipation. Faith had left the house early that morning, and he had expected her return early afternoon, but now it was almost dinner time. Of course, he wasn't privy to all she had to accomplish while in Sicily, but he knew there was a complex network for moving and retrieving information and people that required her periodic absence. Whenever she was gone, he was left on edge until she returned. A quick knock on his bedroom door, and then she burst in. Her eyes were wide, and a big smile lit up her face. Relief coursed through him. "I have good news," she said. "Two, in fact." He stood up from his seat, ignoring a table full of papers. "What?" he asked, as he leaned over and turned up the flame of the oil lamp on the table. This side of the house was usually darker in the late afternoon, and lamps were sometimes used in place of the house's generated electricity in order to conserve power. She came closer. "Why are you working indoors instead of on the balcony?" she asked, frowning. "It's better for your eyes there." "I know," he smiled. "After you left, it became a code red day. Earlier, he had woken to find a sheet of red paper slipped under his door." "Oh, was everything okay? Nothing was said to me." Faith sat down on the other side of the table where he stood. Nathan returned to his seat. "All is well. Just a Council of Nations routine check. Our host ordered me to stay in for the rest of the day." Faith nodded slowly. "That's good. This host home is very important, and if compromised would be a great loss to our movement. Not many homes like this exist where they have the trust of the Council of Nations. The husband's relative works hard to stay undercover there. We can't compromise his sacrifice." She paused and looked down at the table. Self-consciously, Nathan began tidying up the mess. Sorry, he said, I have more than usual today. Faith smiled. She rested clasped hands on the table, and it reminded Nathan of her hand in his the night of the attempted kidnapping. Doesn't bother me, she said. She unclasped her hands and gave him thumbs up. You've no idea how valuable your work is. You're able to sort through so much of our information, verify their authenticity, and give your expert feedback. As a man who is privy to all the inside workings of the Council of Nations, what you give, we could get nowhere else. Even while her words boosted him, they also sobered him. But I'm no longer in that position. Updated strategies and policies might make my insights obsolete. Waving a hand as if his concerns were invalid, Faith said, It doesn't matter. It's enough to have you screen what might be false or true. Your advice regarding security measures is also invaluable. We were able to prevent a number of disastrous infiltrations because of intel from you. Nathan nodded, accepting her praise and thinking how nice a hug would have been along with it. He ran a hand over his head and along his jaw. He really needed a haircut and a shave. How would she even think of hugging him in this state? Now for the good news, Faith reminded him, smiling. He smiled back. Let's have it. First, we'll be leaving for Eden 2 in 3 days. She paused to see his reaction. All right, he said with mixed emotions. He longed for the freedom of Eden 2, but that also meant his time with her was coming to an end. And second, he asked. Second, the family with the child we rescued is doing well. The husband is recovering fairly well from his injuries. That's great, Nathan said. Good to hear. I guess I should say 3 good news, Faith said. They also would like to speak with you. Risking your life for their child made quite an impression on them. Nathan stared at her. Surely house visits weren't allowed. They would like to learn more about Prince Adani, she continued. They would like to become loyals. Now he understood the break from protocol. New scene. 4 hours later, under the cloak of darkness, Nathan and Faith met with the Moretti family. Closer inspection of their home revealed a deteriorating stone structure on the outside, but a cozy, well-kept place on the inside. On the ground floor of the family's small 2-floor apartment, they all sat around a small kitchen table covered with a multicolored tablecloth. The faint scent of grill smoke hung in the air. In the center of the table, a large oil lamp glowed. The family was huddled together on one side across from Nathan and Faith. Their child, Bria, sat on Mrs. Moretti's lap, watching curiously as Nathan and Faith were being thanked over and over. You have done more than you know, Mr. Moretti said in accented English. His tone was filled with emotion. It's what we should do, Nathan said. We were happy to help. But you are strangers to us, Mrs. Moretti said slowly, pausing at intervals to find the English words. Many others would not have become involved. She fumbled around, then pulled her daughter's arm out over the table. Look, she almost lost her life before. Under the glow of the lamp, Nathan viewed the ugly truth. Multiple tiny scars lined the inside of Bria's little arm. Mr. Moretti took over and recounted how a family relative had inexpertly tried to retrieve blood from the child to sell on the black market. Nathan was grieved he asked. Even with the literature circulated, people still believe the blood of children will give them Eden 2 DNA? Both parents nodded. It's true, Faith confirmed. When information about Eden 2 reached the world, many tried traveling to the island, even at the risk of their lives. Soon enough, people realized that the only way to survive in the unique atmosphere was to have a special type of blood. However, many refused to believe that only those who had pledged allegiance and loyalty to Prince Adani developed this blood type. Many people still believe that Prince Adani is dead, Mr. Moretti explained. They also fear the Council of Nations. Yes, Faith agreed. Loyalty to Prince Adani means enmity with Envoy Baines and the Council of Nations. When the mist is no longer a problem, the rule of the Council of Nations will tighten, and those with Eden 2 DNA will face harsher scrutiny. Mrs. Moretti leaned forward, arms around her child. But we want what you have. We want the way of Prince Adani. We do not want to follow the Velchis. She looked at her husband. Yes, Mr. Moretti agreed. We have studied the teachings of the prince and have felt the truth of conviction. He looked at Nathan, eyes pleading. Please, we know you are the brother of Hope Kalakanisa. When news of her and the island that breathed abundant life spread across the world, it was a beacon of light to everyone. She gave hope to the world. His sister's name triggered emotions that Nathan had forcibly buried while living as a fugitive. Now he was being reminded how precious she was to him and how important she was to the world. He also felt a pressing weight of responsibility for this family. Suddenly, Mr. Moretti got up and shuffled over to Nathan, obviously still in pain from his injuries. Nathan was totally caught off guard when the older man awkwardly knelt down beside him and started sobbing. Not understanding and feeling uncomfortable, Nathan looked at Faith. Her look told him she also didn't understand. Please, please, Mr. Moretti said, his voice full of remorse. He looked up at Nathan. Please tell us what to do, for we have struggled with the urgings of the prince's ambassador, and now we long for relief. Of Agios? Nathan asked, now beginning to understand. Yes, Mrs. Moretti said. She came and stood beside her husband, holding tightly to the child. We know he is only seen on Eden 2, but can be felt in the rest of the world. We have felt his call. Setting her child down by her husband, she also knelt. Nathan looked at Faith, feeling helpless. Faith smiled encouragingly. Sandwiched between her parents, Bria stared up at him with wide eyes, triggering memories of the night he first looked into their sweet innocence. He smiled. She responded to his smile by extending a scarred arm, trying to touch him. Nathan gently took hold of her tiny fingers. He wasn't sure how to proceed until he sensed something. It was Agios's essence. Power stirred within him. Would you like to belong to Prince Adani's kingdom? He asked them. Yes, Mr. Moretti answered for them both. We know that he will hear. Nathan looked at Faith. She nodded her support. Okay. Nathan paused, took a deep breath, then began. I'll explain the best I can, then you can call on the sovereign emperor in your own words. At their eager nods, Nathan opened his mouth to proceed. First, he started to say, but how to proceed in this most important time of Triune Connect? He continued, Admit that you've been wrong in living your own way outside the will of the sovereign emperor. Accept that the sovereign prince's death was a sacrifice for all the peoples of the world, and that his return from the dead has created a bridge of reconciliation to the sovereigns. Believe he has returned to his kingdom outside of this world, but that he will return to claim all who belong to him. Pledge allegiance to follow him from here on. Nathan felt Faith's hands on his shoulders. She was whispering, and he realized she was petitioning the sovereign emperor on his behalf. Something loosened within him, and the power increased. He continued, "If your heart is true in this, then the antidote created by the sovereign prince's blood will automatically be generated within you, cleansing you of the toxin and allowing the essence of the sovereigns to enter your inner being. You won't be completely free from the effects of the toxin since it's still in the world, but you'll be less controlled by it until the sovereigns completely destroy it in the end." New scene. "I'm not used to you being this quiet," Faith told Nathan as they hastened back to their host home. Their security shadow had not been available, and with their limited time in Sicily, their trip to the Moretti home had been a risk. Nathan held up the lantern flashlight to see her more clearly. "I'm just contemplating," he said. "What are you contemplating?" she asked. They'd veered off a rural road and were now on a dusty, partially graveled pathway leading to their host's seaside home. Taking a deep breath, he said, "Just thinking how, in 5 short years, almost 6 now, the world has changed so drastically. Apart from Eden 2 in Israel, the whole world is in the same plight." "Which is how envoy bays will be able to rule it," Faith said. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "It's a sobering thought. But in his mind, having Hope on board would facilitate his empowerment. It would be very persuasive to the few council members still holding out, but with or without her, he will be given the power." "The magical island and its princess are beacons to the world," Faith said. "Even Israel's atmosphere, though spared from the mist, can't compare with Eden 2's clear air, free of sickness, poverty, and crime. I feel enamored by it, and I've never been there." Nathan paused, holding the lantern up again. "Then when you come, stay there. Stay with me." Faith returned his stare for a long time, then looked away, shaking her head. "I cannot. You need to be there. You have work there and must be protected there. My work is off the island. I cannot abandon the world." "But you will abandon me?" "Nathan." He lowered the lantern, turned away, and started walking. Sure, he was being unreasonable. In these times, romance was a luxury, but he couldn't seem to escape the bottled emotions that held him taut, especially being with her all the time. "Nathan!" Faith called, following him. "It's fine," he said. "I get it. Nathan!" The increased alarm in her voice shook him. He stopped and turned back to her. The first blow hit his head. He reeled and the lantern fell from his hand. The second blow hit his stomach. The wind rushed out of him. The third blow slammed him face down on the hard ground. He heaved in dry earth, and the salty taste of blood seeped into his mouth. Then he was left alone with a roaring sound in his head. He thought of Faith. He turned sideways, trying to see her. The roaring in his head was soon replaced with sounds of a fight. As he struggled to his feet, he saw her battling two men. Faith seemed dwarfed by their size. He staggered toward them, hampered by searing pain in his stomach. Then he saw it, her gun on the ground, almost 2 meters away from the lantern flashlight. He stumbled past the lantern, then picked up the gun and raised it. His hand shook. He steadied it with his other hand, then pointed, not knowing where to point. It was dark and she was there. Then he saw her. Faith cried out while launching a powerful kick to one of the men. The man grunted and fell heavily to the ground. Then she turned and raised a forearm just in time to block the fist of the second man. Nathan fired the gun into the air. The man stumbled back from Faith, looked towards Nathan. "Get away from her!" Nathan yelled. "Get away from her!" For emphasis, he fired into the air again. By now, he could hear voices and dogs barking from the direction of the host home. The man on the ground struggled up, staggered towards his cohort, and grabbed him by the arm, pulling him along. They both rushed off the path across low brush and into a nearby abandoned vineyard. Nathan lowered the gun, rooted to the spot. He wanted to go pick up the lantern, but at that moment, all he could focus on was Faith rushing over to him and her arms being wrapped around his waist. She pressed to his chest, shaking. "Are you okay?" she asked, sounding frantic. "Are you hurt?" She started sobbing. He'd never witnessed her cry before or seen her so shaken. "I'm okay," he managed to grunt out, still clenching the gun. He raised his free hand to the side of her head, lifting her face to his. "What about you? Are you okay?" She nodded. The voices were getting closer. Lights were there too. It was now or never. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers, momentarily forgetting all his pain. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 seconds before she pulled away. Her eyes were wide. She released him and stepped back. He smiled. Faith heaved a sigh, then tromped past him to pick up the lantern. Back at his side, she asked, "Do you really think I won't deck you again?" Still smiling, he asked, "How could you, after crying so hard for me?" Then he dropped the smile and winced as pain radiated through his abdomen. His head throbbed. Stone-faced, she held out a hand. "Give me the gun." After he handed it over, she stuffed it in the back of her pants and pulled her shirt over it. She started turning away, then suddenly stopped. Nathan followed the direction of her stare to a treed area that separated the path they were on from the road. Then he saw them through the trees, standing like two great silhouettes against a huge boulder wall that bordered the far side of the road. They stood about 6 meters apart from each other, an agent of Prince Adani and an emissary of the Velchkis. The latter looked at Nathan with eyes that glowed around what was like a black hole, empty, lifeless. Then the being turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness. The other, with eyes like fire and a cloaked glow to his body, stood a moment longer. He nodded, then turned and disappeared, it seemed, into the boulders. "So that's what it was," Faith murmured. "What?" Nathan asked. Would he ever get used to seeing those beings? "There's still a battle for your life." Faith turned to him and held out a hand. "Come, let's go." Surprised at the offered hand, he wondered at the change in her temperament. He obediently took her hand, and they started walking toward the voices and lights. Oh my. So, a dramatic end to chapter 30. Please join me next time for chapter 31. Take care.